The United States now pays more in interest on its debt than it spends on its entire military, over $1 trillion per year, just in interest payments. The debt sits above $37 trillion. China and Japan are actively reducing their Treasury holdings, and yet the system hasn't collapsed. In fact, a new mechanism is being built right now that may allow this to continue for decades. It's not discussed in mainstream financial media, but if you understand how the system actually works, the pattern becomes clear, and it has everything to do with stablecoins. Here's the paradox. The United States has the largest debt burden in its history, $37 trillion and rising. Federal interest payments now exceed defense spending. That's unprecedented. The Congressional Budget Office projects deficits will average $2 trillion annually for the foreseeable future. And at the same time, the traditional buyers of U.S. debt are stepping back. China has reduced its Treasury holdings by over 20% since 2013. Japan has slowed its purchases. Foreign central banks are diversifying away from dollars. So who's buying? The Federal Reserve has stepped in periodically, but that creates inflation. And domestic buyers can't absorb trillions of dollars in new debt every year without consequences. By every traditional metric, this system should be under severe stress. Yet Treasury yields remain manageable. The dollar remains the global reserve currency. The system continues. How? The answer lies in understanding a pattern that's repeated throughout American financial history. The United States has faced unsustainable debt levels before, and each time it responded the same way. It didn't default. It devalued. 1933, the Great Depression. Federal debt was approaching unsustainable levels relative to gold reserves. The Roosevelt administration issued Executive Order 6102. U.S. citizens were required to turn in their gold to the government at $20.67 per ounce. Then the government revalued gold to $35 per ounce. What happened? The dollar was devalued by 40% against gold overnight. Domestic debt became easier to service. Creditors lost purchasing power. The government gained breathing room. 1971. Vietnam War spending and Great Society programs created massive deficits. Foreign governments began redeeming dollars for gold. President Nixon closed the gold window. The dollar was no longer convertible to gold at a fixed rate. The result? The dollar floated freely and devalued significantly. Over the next decade, inflation eroded the real value of existing debt. 2008. The financial crisis. Government debt exploded as bailouts and stimulus programs were implemented. The Federal Reserve launched quantitative easing. It purchased trillions of dollars in treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, effectively printing money to buy government debt. Again, the mechanism was the same. The debt wasn't repaid in real terms, it was inflated away. Again, the mechanism was the same. The debt wasn't repaid in real terms, it was inflated away. Notice the pattern. In each case, the U.S. found a way to reduce the real burden of its debt without formally defaulting. It changed the rules. It devalued the currency. It inflated away obligations. And each time the pain was distributed. Savers lost purchasing power. Creditors lost real value. But the system survived. The question now is, how does this work in the modern era? There's a problem with the traditional playbook. Inflation creates political consequences. When prices rise significantly, voters notice, approval ratings collapse, administrations lose power. In 2022, when inflation reached 9%, it dominated political discourse. Midterm elections shifted, consumer confidence plummeted, the Federal Reserve was forced to raise rates aggressively, which increased the government's own borrowing costs. So domestic inflation has limits. You can only inflate away debt so much before the political and economic pain becomes unbearable. Historically, the U.S. had an advantage. As the global reserve currency, it could export inflation. When the Fed printed dollars, much of that inflation was absorbed by foreign holders of dollars and dollar-denominated assets. The pain was distributed globally, not just domestically, but that mechanism is weakening. Countries are conducting trade in other currencies. Central banks are diversifying reserves. The dollar's share of global reserves has declined from 70% in 2000 to under 60% today. So the question becomes, how do you continue devaluing the currency without concentrated domestic pain and without losing reserve currency status? Enter stablecoins. Stablecoins are digital currencies designed to maintain a one-to-one peg with the US dollar. Tether, USDC, and others. They're used globally for crypto trading, cross-border payments, and as a dollar substitute in countries with unstable currencies. The stablecoin market is now worth over $150 billion and growing rapidly. But here's what most people miss: how stablecoins are backed. Recent regulatory frameworks, particularly those being implemented in 2025, require stablecoin issuers to back every digital dollar with actual dollars or U.S. Treasury securities. For every USDC in circulation, Circle must hold $1 in cash or short-term treasuries. For every Tether holdings must hold equivalent reserves. What does this create? Automatic demand for U.S. government debt. As stablecoin adoption grows globally, especially in emerging markets and among younger generations, issuers must continuously buy U.S. Treasuries to back the new supply. But unlike traditional Treasury buyers, these holders are distributed. They're individual users in Argentina protecting against peso devaluation, traders in Nigeria moving money across borders, crypto investors in Asia using stablecoins for liquidity, millions of users spread across hundreds of countries, each unknowingly funding U.S. government deficits. Here's why this matters. When China holds $1 trillion in treasuries, it's a concentrated creditor. It can threaten to sell. It has the leverage. But when 1 billion stablecoin users collectively hold $1 trillion in treasury-backed digital currency, there's no single entity to negotiate with. No concentrated creditor to apply pressure. The debt is distributed, and distributed debt is harder to abandon. This is what makes the stablecoin mechanism different from previous devaluation strategies. It doesn't look like monetary policy. It looks like private sector innovation. It doesn't look like money printing. It looks like technological progress. And most importantly, it distributes the eventual cost globally without requiring explicit cooperation from foreign governments. Think about the phases. Phase 1. Infrastructure. Regulatory frameworks are built, stablecoins become legal and widely accepted. Major financial institutions integrate them. This is happening now. Phase 2. Mass adoption. Billions of people globally use stablecoins for payments, savings, and transactions. Emerging markets especially adopt them as dollar alternatives. Issuers accumulate trillions in treasuries to back this supply. Phase 3. Devaluation. At some point, when the debt burden becomes truly unsustainable, the U.S. inflates. But now, the pain is distributed across 1 billion stablecoin holders, not concentrated in a few central banks. Each individual user loses purchasing power gradually, but no single entity loses enough to make it worthwhile to exit the system entirely. And because stablecoins are used for real economic activity, payments, remittances, commerce, users can't simply abandon them without disrupting their own financial lives. The system becomes self-reinforcing. This is not conspiracy. This is economic design. Let me be clear about what I'm describing. This is scenario analysis. This is pattern recognition. This is not a guaranteed prediction. Stablecoins may succeed in this role, or they may not. Regulatory frameworks could change. Adoption could plateau. Alternative systems could emerge. But the underlying problem remains: the U.S. has a debt that cannot be repaid in real terms under current fiscal trajectories. And history shows that when faced with this problem, the U.S. has consistently chosen devaluation over default. The tools change. The mechanisms evolve. But the fundamental strategy remains. Stablecoins represent a modern tool that fits the historical pattern. Whether by design or accident, they create a mechanism for distributing U.S. debt globally in a way that's never been possible before, and rational investors should understand how this could unfold. So what does a rational investor do with this information? First, no panic. This is a long-term structural dynamic, not an imminent crisis. Second, no binary bets. Betting everything on collapse or betting everything on status quo are both extreme positions. Instead, think about portfolio resilience. If currency devaluation is a long-term risk, you want exposure to real assets. Things with intrinsic value that maintain purchasing power through inflation. Real estate, commodities, stocks and companies with pricing power, inflation-protected securities. You want businesses that can pass costs to consumers, utilities, consumer staples, healthcare, companies with strong balance sheets and low debt. You want geographic diversification. Not all currencies devalue at the same rate. Not all economies face the same pressures. And you want to understand what you own. If you hold stablecoins, recognize that you're indirectly exposed to U.S. Treasuries. That may be fine. But understand the risk. The goal isn't to outsmart the system. It's to position yourself so that regardless of how this unfolds, you're protected. That's rational risk management. Here's the broader lesson. Financial systems evolve. They don't remain static. And when they face structural problems, they adapt. The gold standard ended. Bretton Woods ended. Pure fiat evolved. Stablecoins may represent the next evolution. A way to extend dollar dominance in a multipolar world, a way to distribute debt without formal agreements. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it rhymes. The mechanisms change, the technology advances, but the fundamental dynamics, debt, devaluation, distribution, those patterns remain. Understanding this doesn't require cynicism. It requires clear-eyed analysis. The system isn't evil. It's not a conspiracy. It's simply doing what systems do, adapting to survive. And investors who understand that adaptation can position themselves accordingly. If this perspective was valuable, subscribe to the channel and like the video. This is where we analyze the systems that move markets without hype, without panic, just clear, rational thinking. Your support helps the channel grow and allows us to keep producing in-depth, honest analysis. Thanks for watching. I appreciate your time and your attention. This content is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, legal, or tax advice. The views expressed are based on general economic analysis and may not be suitable for your individual circumstances. Before making any investment or financial decisions, you should consult with a licensed and authorized financial professional in accordance with applicable laws and regulations in your jurisdiction.